Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack. Welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about application development, deployment, and management at scale. Here with me on the stage at ServerlessConf in San Francisco. I've been seeing Nathan here over the past 2 days. We're Portland colleagues. Stackery is a new sponsor of the New Stack, so thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And you stopped me yesterday and you said that you guys had just announced that you were going to standardize on AWS SAM. So maybe you could just tell us about about yourself, Stackery, and then talk about AWS SAM and what it is and why you decided to standardize on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Stackery is a tool for teams to build serverless applications together. And essentially what we found is that it's relatively easy for a single developer to build a serverless function and put it in their own cloud account. It's a lot trickier for professional teams at organizations to collaborate, to share cloud accounts, to isolate, sandbox their resources, and kind of manage a release pipeline. So these teams are picking a number of tools to help them organize both their code, their application, and also how they manage their infrastructure. And one of the leading solutions that has come out over the last year and really started to reach maturity is AWS SAM. So AWS SAM is essentially infrastructure as code. It's a serverless framework. SAM is short for Serverless Application Model, that helps developers do the tricky bit of serverless, which is not writing the function, but is actually connecting that compute resource, that Lambda, to all of the other services in the cloud account. How do they have configure their database and configure their message streams and their API endpoints? So AWS wanted to make that easier for developers. They released AWS SAM. It started to gain a lot of momentum in the market. And we really decided that we wanted to follow the lead of AWS and of our, a lot of our enterprise customers to really standardize, to focus our support. So now 100% of SAM applications run with Stackery support, and any application built using Stackery will be automatically turned into a SAM application.
And what is the difference between what SAM is now and what it was like before SAM? And I'm wondering if there's any kind of corollary here to the Amazon API gateway.
Yeah, so under the covers, the way that you define in the AWS ecosystem, the way that you define your resources, so say again like a database or a VPC, is to describe all of the configuration settings using another Amazon product called Cloud Formation. Cloud Formation is a way to statically define, to describe your architecture, and then execute it and have that implemented automatically into the cloud. So code defining infrastructure. One of the challenges with Cloud Formation, though, is that, and also one of the key benefits, is that it's so flexible, it's so powerful, that there's also a lot to learn. If you're an application developer and your experience has been to focus on the code, maybe you're used to packaging your application in a Docker container and handing it over to an ops team, you suddenly find with serverless development that you have this new responsibility, which is to, at least in the development cycle, manage the attached services to your code. My code relies on a database, then to develop it, I'm going to write my code, I'm going to ship it to the cloud, but it has to have a database that I can use to test it and iterate on it. And so now suddenly I have to learn how to configure it. Amazon realized that because Cloud Formation was so powerful and so broad, that it was also very intimidating and it had a high learning curve. So they released AWS SAM to focus on 3 common serverless patterns. One is creating an API endpoint, which is API gateway. One is creating that function, which is on Lambda, and the other is to create a database. In this case, they call it a table, and it's actually a DynamoDB table. So SAM gives you shortcuts. Instead of having to configure all of the settings for all of your resources, they give you these little shortcuts to just say, hey, I need an API endpoint, I'm going to connect it to a function, and that function is going to rely on this database. It gives you, I think, a nice on-ramp into serverless and also into infrastructure as code if that's a new skill that you're developing.
Yeah, infrastructure as code is a term that's been around for a long time, and the cloud formation is almost like an abstraction of that, isn't it? And so with SAM, the Serverless Application Model, what patterns does it follow that makes it distinctive then? What is it doing in that kind of next generation that's easy to use? Is it the abstraction of that infrastructure as code?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it still is infrastructure as code, but it is the abstraction that adds value. So you can imagine, like, I'm going to use a weak analogy here, but say you're a bakery, and you have all of these different products. You have a cake, you have a pie, you have a cupcake. Each of those end products is actually composed of a number of ingredients. It's similar to how we build cloud components.
Right.
Is you say, yeah, I have an API endpoint, but that's really, an API service with, some sort of, description of all of my endpoints, their methods, where they route to, how to handle those requests, what kind of authentication I'm using. It can get much more complex. So with SAM, the idea is that instead of saying I need butter and sugar and milk and eggs, you can say I need a cupcake. Now they don't do this for every resource inside of AWS, but the nice thing about SAM is that you can think of it as an extension of Cloud Formation. So while you're working within this kind of abstract layer, you can define things very easily. I need an API endpoint or I need a function. But if you need flexibility, if you need to go further down the path, you can actually extend it with native Cloud Formation, which means that a developer might be able to very quickly get a prototype up and running and then pull in an ops team at a point of maturity and say, can you help me configure this, the way, down to the minuscule details that our company cares about, our organization. Stackery, by the way, this was part of why it was such a natural choice, is because we also introduced an abstraction layer. In fact, we have about 20 different services in AWS that we support natively, including things like VPCs, SQS or SNS or Kinesis streams. And so we've actually seen that developers ramping up on serverless have a lot of learning to do in terms of how do I configure each of these resources. And we can accelerate that adoption if we can just say, here's a menu of items that you can build your application from. Just drag it in, say, I need this new kind of resource and wire it up. I think that, I may be anticipating that the direction that SAM will go in the future is to continue to extend their abstraction, to have more of these kind of pre-configured resources. And one of the ways that can happen is with community involvement. So SAM is an open source project that was released by AWS. And so you can see how, as the community continues to kind of embrace this, they also continue to invest in it and create more of those abstractions that other developers can then borrow off.
That was going to be my question, because I was wondering about, like, a company like yourself. How are you guys using it? How are you using it internally now? And how is that providing proof for you of its usefulness?
Yeah, well, I'll be frank. We looked at SAM about a year ago, maybe 9 months ago, and just didn't feel it was ready. It was, like a lot of open source projects. It started with a great idea, and then you had to wait for a little bit of maturity to emerge.
In what respects?
So I think it was just not as flexible initially as we expected it to be. SAM actually has a supporting component, which is the CLI. So you use SAM to describe your infrastructure, and then you use the CLI to implement it, or to introduce some new changes to it. And so we really wanted to see that that AWS was going to commit, that they were going to follow through, that they were going to continue to invest down this path, that this would be well supported, that there would be a community that emerged around it, that we want to, like all technology choices, you don't want to be the only ones out there. You want to know that there's a community, there's support, there's a movement, there's a wave, and that you haven't made the wrong decision. It's the reason people still buy IBM, right? Nobody got fired for buying IBM. we want to be in that same position. We want to know we're following the patterns that the best in class are following. And now today, that is AWS SAM. And so we really saw it turn a corner. 6 months ago, 3 months ago, we started redeveloping to support it natively. And now we use it as well. So we're betting heavily in this direction. AWS is betting heavily in this direction. I've been speaking with a lot of the audience here at ServerlessConf, and it really seems to be kind of a big moment for AWS to really kind of put a stake in the ground and say, this is the right way we think you should be managing your serverless application.
That's fascinating too, that AWS has been able to get some traction in this as well, and that they put the investment behind it. Which is significant. What were the other approaches that you were looking at that compared to AWS SAM?
Yeah, well, so initially, Stackery used our own proprietary way to describe stacks. It worked. It certainly solved a lot of customer problems in the sense that it introduced an abstraction layer. People could work at kind of at a logical layer. They could still drop down and configure things more granularly if they needed to. But again, it was kind of it was more noise in the market in the end. We felt like we were really asking people to learn to do it our way, and by consolidating on SAM, we're instead saying, let's do this the cloud native way. Let's follow the best practice in the market. Now, there are, of course, other frameworks. Each framework has, slight differences between them. There are other ways you can describe your architecture. Apex is one that I've used in the past. Serverless framework is obviously a very popular one. And one thing to keep in mind is that SAM is built for AWS. So if you plan on building on, say, Azure, you're going to be looking for a different tool to use. I would like to see that Microsoft steps up and they introduce their cloud native way of doing this, their best practice. I do think that the ecosystem, the community frameworks, the open source ones, they certainly have a place as well because they can help you manage multi-cloud. They can be a little bit cloud agnostic. At the end of the day, for us, cloud. It's nice to be cloud agnostic. We have relationships with multiple cloud vendors, but the reality is we run our workload on Amazon. Our customers are running their serverless workloads predominantly on Amazon. We recognize that as the pattern and the trend, and so we're not fighting it. We're aligning with it.
That allows you to then be able to target that customer base too.
Yeah, I can't put too fine a point on it. Amazon's customers are our customer prospects, right? This is where we're going. But it's not just that. Amazon had a head start in serverless, and they had a head start in cloud. And I think that there's this common misconception in the serverless world that people are looking at, Lambda, and they're looking at Google Cloud Functions, which just came out of beta, and they're looking at Azure Functions, and they're trying to say, what's the best function as a service technology? And the truth is that that's not really the case. We have data in AWS. We have existing services in AWS. It was really never a question of which cloud should we be building, right? Additionally, each developer, each operations team, each organization, they start to build a competency. They build experience with one cloud provider or another. People talk about being able to distribute their workloads across different clouds. There might be some engineering overhead to that, but even more, there's an intellectual overhead. You have to now learn the nuances of all of these different vendors. And there can be a case to be made to do that, but in our case, we're at the scale that we operate at, it makes sense to be consolidated.
There's not the abstraction there between different cloud services that has historically been helpful for technology to get adopted by multiple carriers, for example, with SMS. And now there's not that universal kind of platform out there.
Yeah, so there's not. So we are starting to see kind of movements in this direction. The CNCF has a serverless working group. They'd like to introduce, I think, kind of a standardization of how should a function as a service layer work, how should events be packaged and standardized. Event Gateway is an open source project that's doing some similar work in this space. I think that there's a case to be made that maybe one day we'll kind of standardize. My view on it is that the big difference between these, this is a generic compute instance. It's intentionally very genericized. There's not a lot of nuance. The real difference here is kind of that function signature. You get an event. What context do you have? What is the your code given from the cloud provider to work with? And changing your code to move from one cloud provider to another, maybe it might be a hassle, but it's a relatively trivial hassle. On the other hand, moving your data from one cloud to another, that's a big engineering problem. That's a hurdle. Yeah. And so, I think we talk a lot about how it'd be nice to be able to run our workloads in multiple data centers, and I think it's true, it would be nice. But until we can get our data in multiple data centers, I don't see, it doesn't feel pragmatic.
It just seems confusing.
It really.
Yeah. So, what are people talking about who are coming by your booth here at ServerlessConf?
Yeah, so it's actually been really fun to see. So this is our third ServerlessConf, and it's been really fun to see kind of the community mature and evolve. I'd say a year and a half ago, we were getting a lot of, what's the right use case for serverless? How should I be doing this? Last time it was a lot of kind of theoretical conversations. How would serverless work in this way, or would it fall short here? Today, it's really practical. It's, hey, our team is struggling to stand up developer environments quickly, or we haven't found the right way to enforce or to provision IAM roles and policies that doesn't bottleneck our development cycle. Right. What's your approach? How should we be doing this? How does Stackery plug in and help us with these problems? And so I definitely see maturity in kind of use cases, but I also see maturity in the thinking and the way that we're applying this technology to actual business problems. It's not academic anymore. It's now a real production technology that's being broadly adopted.
That's fascinating. And how do you see opening it up to larger groups of people? Development is just needing more people in it. How do you see this movement helping provide that momentum? And there's obviously a lot of abstractions that are being built into the code that allow people to do things like we were hearing in the lightning talks yesterday from one of your your content. Oh no, it was from Serverless. Another one from Serverless who was talking about it. How do you see this opening up? Because there's just so many developers who have been who work on existing technologies, and it's pretty technical. It's going to have to get more abstracted. Are you starting to see that?
Yeah. So first off, look, the world is moving digital.
Yeah.
We need more and more developers.
Right.
And I think the serverless community is very welcoming. I know we all want to bring in more developers.
Right.
There's two ways to do that. One way is to teach people all of these new skills. The other way is to make our systems not require so many new skills. And that's really, I think, one of the key advantages of serverless. It's a pattern we're seeing, which is it lets you build at-scale systems, production quality systems, big, mission-critical, customer-facing, high-visibility applications with less effort, with a little bit less skill, and we're continuing to make it easier and easier. Our company, this is our mission. We want to make it so that organizations can do serverless in production without having to retrain their entire workforce. Yeah. And I see it's not just us. There's a company here, Standard Library. They've found that a big part of their market actually comes from some of these business teams. They'll have a marketer or a salesperson who says, hey, there's a little part of my workload that I need to automate. And if I could just write a tiny bit of code, a little bit of simple logic, and have that run when I need it, that would really help me out. And so I think what we're going to see is we're going to see two patterns. We are going to see core software developers today continue to push the frontiers of what is possible with serverless. But I also think we're going to see that the community starts accepting more and more people into the fold. People with non-traditional backgrounds. with non-tech, with non-software background, saying, we can use this technology to make your job better with a little bit of training and how to write the logic, but never having to deal with the infrastructure, the servers, the undifferentiated heavy lifting of how to get software running in production. And honestly, like, I love what that does. I love what that does for my business. I love what that does for diversity in our system. I love what it can do for the economy. So I actually think this could be a really positive trend that we're seeing.
Great. Well, Nathan, thanks a lot for taking some time to talk at ServerlessConf here in San Francisco. We'll both be heading back to Portland soon. You guys have Serverless Days coming up?
We do, yeah. So Serverless Days, Serverless Days Portland is happening in September, and I believe you're gonna be there. So we'd be excited to host you if you're in the Portland area or can be in September. Come check us out. Serverless Days is a global movement of cities across the world, and we're hosting Portland. So we'd love to invite you to be there.
Great. Thanks, Nathan. Appreciate it. Listen to more episodes of The New Stack Makers at thenewstack.io/podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.